Hi, I'm Max Jones, and today with my co-host Diego Ramos, we talk to Sabby Sabs, host of the Sabby Sabs Podcast and a co-host at Revolutionary Blackout Network, about the 2024 election landscape with a focus on the Cornel West campaign and the role that Peter Daou's short-lived role as his campaign manager has played in West's now independent run. Sabby has been one of the leading journalists and media figures covering the post-duopoly elements of the 2024 election, and we use her recent interviews with West, Daou, and Jill Stein as a foundation for the larger conversation. If you like this interview, make sure to like and share to help us fight the suppressive big tech algorithms. Thank you so much.
Hi, Sabby. Thanks for talking to us.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on.
We want to talk about the 2024 election. We've seen that you've had the privilege of talking to Cornel West specifically and Peter Daou and a lot of influential people in the upcoming election. And to start off, we just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on his overall movement as of late, and what does it mean to switch up, the 3 times already, from the People's Party initially to the Greens and now running as an independent. And do you think it will help Cornel West's chances of building coalitions with all kinds of Americans?
Yeah, so great question. I think that I was really excited when Cornel West joined the Green Party because I'm familiar with the Green Party. I also know that the Green Party does have ballot access, which is something that the People's Party did not have. But the Green Party now has ballot access, I believe, confirmed in 18 states. There were some states that removed ballot access for the Green Party, New York being one of them. So even in states like New York and particularly Ohio, Dr. West was still going to have to run as an independent in those states under the Green Party, if that makes sense. So I think that I've talked to people on both sides. I've actually interviewed candidates that were Green Party candidates and Green Party politicians as well. I think the Green Party does have some issues that they need to iron out. And this is coming directly from Green Party members that I've had onto my show. So I think that people like Cornel West, Jesse Ventura, who I interviewed about this as well, I think they ran into some of those issues with the Green Party. I mean, it is a party. It is a political party. So when there is a political party, there's leadership within that party, and there are certain rules that you have to abide by. And I think with someone like Cornel West, I think he's more of like a free spirit. He wants to kind of do his own thing instead of following the strategy of the Green Party, so to speak. So at the same time, some people were actually happy when he left the Green Party because they wanted him to run as an independent from the get-go. Now, when I did speak to Dr. West recently, I did bring up the issue about ballot access as an independent, because the reality is in states like California, Arizona, and Texas, it does cost a lot more money to get on the ballot as an independent. California, he could be looking at millions of dollars just to get on the ballot in that state alone. So in some states, it does cost more money. But at the same time, in other states, it's actually easier to run as an independent instead of running as a third party candidate. So there's going to be these walls that he's going to hit as an independent candidate. Obviously, I think Cornel West has had no problem getting press attention from the mainstream media because of his name recognition. That was something we've been pushing for a long time, for someone to run third party or independent that has a big name. This is why some people were so excited about the possibility of a Jesse Ventura. So he has that advantage in reference to getting that attention from the mainstream press. But that being said, I think that it is time for the campaign to start hitting the ground running. Now, Cornel West has participated in strike activities. He went to the UAW strike. He's marched recently with the students at UCLA in reference to ceasefire for Palestine. But I think that it's time for Dr. West to start doing campaign rallies, because when we look at the other people like RFK Jr., who is also running as an independent now, he's been holding rallies. And I think Dr. West really needs to do that. I'm not sure if they're waiting to get started on that maybe next year, but I think you should get started on that as early as possible, especially if you're running outside of the two-party system. So I think that's something that does need to change, more rallies. And then also with Peter Daou gone, now Dr. West does have to find a campaign manager, again, which is not easy to do when you're running third party or independent.
And how did talking to both Jill Stein and Peter Daou influence your opinion on Dow's appointment as West campaign manager? Because I know that there has been a lot of discourse on the argument online whether or not he was an infiltrator and or if he was just the right fit at all. And has your opinion evolved at all since Daou now left the West campaign after advising him to or maybe not well, according to West, Daou was the one that presented him with the pros and cons of whether or not to leave the Green Party or go independent, and West chose to leave. So now that he's influenced that decision and left, what has that changed your opinion on anything at all?
So I think that the biggest issue that I had with Peter Daou being a manager in reference to this campaign is the fact that obviously there was the issue that he worked with the Hillary Clinton campaign, but this is not to say that people can't change over years. I know people in left independent media space that did support Hillary Clinton that no longer support that part of the Democratic Party or don't support the Democratic Party at all. But the biggest problem that I had was the fact that he was just managing Marianne Williamson's campaign, and Marianne is running in the Democratic Party. He left that campaign because he said his family members had health issues, and then he hopped into another campaign. And that was my concern. It gave me pause. I felt like it was too soon. It seemed like he was just hopping from one campaign to the next. And also there were those health concerns there. So I did kind of feel like maybe this is not the right time for you to take on, another political campaign. So there were concerns there. There were also concerns in reference to, is he doing this to try to help Cornel West, or is this an attempt from the Democratic Party to get Peter Daou to try to actually demolish what Cornel West could potentially build here? So there was still that concern, regardless of what Peter told me during that interview. I mean, obviously, if you interview someone, they're not going to say, yes, I'm a plant from the DNC. They're not going to tell you that. I don't have proof that Peter Daou was sent there to do that. But at the same time, he would have not been my top choice. Now, Jill Stein did recommend him. She said that she thought, he was one of the best of the best. Another thing that Jill Stein did say to me is that it's not easy to find someone to do that job, particularly if you're a third party or independent candidate. It's even harder. Some people don't want to do it because it's a career killer. If you manage a third party campaign, you'll probably never get a job in the political space in DC again. So I think that having that reassurance from Jill kind of made me understand why that decision was made, but I still had hesitancy in reference to if Peter was going to go through this whole thing, if he was going to do things, properly, because he had never managed a third party campaign either. So there was concern there. And then there was the ballot access issue. So Cornel West left the Green Party. He's running as an independent. Peter Daou does not have experience with independent candidates trying to get ballot access. And now he's left the campaign, and there still is that ballot access issue. So essentially, I feel like Dr. West's campaign is starting all over again.
And the ballot access issue has actually gotten worse now that he's left the Green Party, right? Since Dow's come on.
That's right, because you can't continue to keep that ballot access that you gained from the Green Party. Even in Arizona, I know they were really close to reaching that signature goal in Arizona for Cornel West campaign through the Green Party. But now, that's no longer the case. So it's like you do have to start all over again. You have to mobilize people to get on the ground to get those signatures. That's one of the hardest parts. And you have to raise the money. Now, with someone like RFK Jr., he's not going to have as much of a tough time because he is taking money from billionaires. Like, he's taking money from people like David Sachs, who has publicly said that he's supporting RFK Jr.'s campaign and has hosted fundraisers for him as well. So someone like RFK Jr. can actually buy his way onto the ballot as an independent. Dr. West, and I've looked at the fundraising totals, Dr. West obviously is not going to be able to do that, especially if you're not taking that corporate money, right? So you have to do a grassroots effort, which means you need tens and thousands of people mobilized on the ground in these states to get that accomplished.
And kind of in relation to that grassroots effort, I feel like the importance of independent media is coming to the fray here for this election specifically, especially since candidates like Cornel, RFK Jr., Vivek have already shown that they're willing to go on, smaller online shows and channels and to reach like a broader audience compared to the bigwigs in the duopoly. I doubt Joe Biden is gonna go on our show or RBN, but I'm wondering what your opinion is on the efficacy of that and how important independent media will play, the role it will play in this upcoming election.
I think independent media will be critical in the 2024 election because more and more people are deciding not to watch mainstream media. Like CNN numbers are down. I think Fox News probably has the highest ratings from CNN and MSNBC. I think they're still the highest, but all of their ratings have decreased since Trump lost the last election. So Trump really was helping them gain ratings there. I will say, I do think it's great that these candidates are willing to go into smaller platforms. I will say, even with someone like RFK Jr., though, he's still particular about which of those platforms he'll go on based on the audience that they have. For example, I know people who are left commentators in this space that reached out to RFK Jr.'s campaign, myself included, and for whatever reason, his communications director is not allowing RFK Jr. to go onto these left shows. So that includes myself, that includes the Gray Zone. And I'm talking about platforms that have hundreds and thousands of subscribers. I haven't seen RFK Jr. on Useful Idiots. I haven't seen him on Bad Faith. So I think what is happening there, for whatever reason, it seems like they're trying to shield him from having to talk about Israel-Palestine and the position that he has on that issue. And I think that's why that conversation that he said that he would have with Max Blumenthal has not happened.
Right. Yeah. And also, just kind of segueing off that, could you also talk about the importance of the Israel-Palestine issue in this election as well? I mean, it's every day is different, and who knows what's going to happen next, but it's clear that a conversation has been open here. The Pandora's box has been open, and we're really going to get to see if these candidates will stand up to the Israel lobby, but it's going to be interesting to see whether they really can do that. And like you just mentioned, someone like RFK, who seemed like someone who was anti-war or presented that kind of attitude to an extent, was inconsistent with his beliefs, especially when it came to that kind of issue. So how do you think that will impact the election?
Well, so far, I was reading an article recently that said that Joe Biden is actually down 11 points for the month of October, just among Democrats alone. And I think we all know what happened in the month of October. We go back to October 7th, right? So this issue, which a lot of people told me for the past 2.5 years since I've been doing this show, was not an important issue to the American people. Apparently, that is not true. And so I've heavily pushed for people to talk about this more, to talk about what's happening to the Palestinian people. Now we have the potential of the state of Israel basically committing a genocide of the Palestinian people, and not just in Gaza. They've actually been attacking the West Bank as well. They're also bombing Lebanon and Syria. And what people have to understand is this is about resources. So there's oil and gas along the Gaza Strip that I believe Netanyahu wants to take hold of. And this is also about the idea of establishing a greater Israel. So the plan when you colonize isn't just to colonize one area and stay there. The plan is always to expand. And Netanyahu has talked about this before, about this idea of a greater Israel. So he obviously wants to expand into the southern part of Lebanon, part of Syria, part of Jordan also, if I remember correctly, and I believe a small tidbit of Saudi Arabia. So it was never just to stay where they are. That means that the Palestinian people would have to be pushed out in order for that to happen. And they've been doing this all along, slowly and slowly pushing them out. The people that live in Gaza, these people are basically living in an open, people call it an open air prison, but I don't want to call it that anymore because they're not criminals. People are basically living in a concentration camp. A fence is not a border. So you can't put up a fence and say, this is Gaza and this is Israel now. this is now an established border. It's not a border. They have trapped these people. They told them to leave the northern part of Gaza and go to the southern part of Gaza. Then they started bombing the southern part of Gaza. These people have nowhere to go. You know, people say they should go to Egypt. Egypt should let them in. Egypt said they don't have space for 2 million people. And also, I really believe that Egypt knows that this is exactly what Netanyahu wants. He wants them out. He wants them pushed out. So I don't know what is going to happen going forward with this potential conflict. But I will say I've been very impressed by the number of people that have been protesting for a ceasefire and against genocide all across the world, not just in the United States. And we've talked about Chicago, LA, huge marches here in Boston, but globally, it's happening everywhere. It's happening in Turkey, it's happening in Greece, it's happening in South Korea, all across the globe. And this is something similar I saw to the protests with George Floyd. So now you notice mainstream media has to change their narrative a little bit and actually talk about the history of the Palestinian people, which I don't think they were doing before those protests began.
I want, building off the Israel-Palestine issue, Sam Husseini, who we've interviewed, has made the argument that with West generally taking the establishment line on COVID, like the thing that comes to mind to me is when Jimmy Dore was interviewing him, and Jimmy Dore said something like, the pandemic is the greatest issue of my time. And then Cornel West kind of just dismissed that and argued with Jimmy about it not being so significant. And then RFK taking the establishment line on Israel-Palestine, that these two, you know, seemingly anti-establishment figures might split the sects of the public who are sick of both parties into separate camps, and rather than uniting them behind a singular movement. So I wanted to ask, how important do you think it is when it comes to forming a coalition that's adversarial to and outside of the party duopoly, to have a leader that captures the anti-establishment sentiment on both of those issues?
So I think we need to focus on the anti-war issues. So for me, if you are a political candidate and you say you're anti-war and you're against giving aid to these other countries, giving weapons to these other countries, including obviously Ukraine, then it's somewhat hypocritical to turn around and say we need to give Israel everything that they need to continue this fight, right? That, to me, that's hypocritical. So people like RFK Jr., to me, I think they really showed who they really are and how they really feel when the country changes from Ukraine to Israel. So that's important to pay attention to. Two, in reference to the pandemic, I think that Cornel West, if I remember correctly, in reference to the Jimmy Dore interview, he did say he would be willing to establish some type of committee to hear more voices and not just the opinion of one doctor or one scientist, that kind of thing. But I think that both of these issues need to be revisited. I think when it comes to the pandemic, I mean, I live in a state that was locked down. I'm in Massachusetts. It was very tough here for people who lived here, and for friends of mine that lived in states that were not locked down. They don't really understand how this affected us economically, how many small businesses had to close because of it. Even though there was the money that was provided from the federal government, by the time that money came around, it was already too late for some of these businesses. So I think that is something that does need to be discussed. I think that we need to have the position of, you can be against mandates, you can be against lockdowns, and still feel the need to, okay, this is a public health crisis. We need to hear what the doctors have to say, but we need to listen to more than one health expert, someone other than obviously Dr. Fauci. You need to hear multiple voices. And then two, we need to take a look at what other countries were doing, how they were handling that pandemic. So like, for example, in New Zealand, if I remember correctly, they shut the entire country down. They gave everybody recurring monthly checks. So economically, they didn't have some of the suffers that we had in this country. And then they were able to reopen again quickly. Whereas in the United States, it was kind of left up to the governors. And for people, by the way, who say it was the Democrat governors, my governor at that point in time was Charlie Baker, and Charlie Baker is a Republican, and he chose to shut the state down. So I think that we need to get outside of this. It's the Democrats, it's the Republicans who made this decision, and just look at what's best for the people in the country. So I think it was a mistake not to look at what other countries were doing in reference to handling the pandemic and how they were able to curb it and get the economy back up and running. And I think we failed there. I also think we failed in reference to listening to one particular voice when there were other doctors and scientists that were talking about this as well. And it also doesn't help that platforms like YouTube and Twitter were censoring other voices. So it's obvious that there was money to be made here. And I think that should have been discussed as well. And when people had legitimate concerns and issues in reference to the jab, I think those people should have been listened to and not shunned. So I think the way the U.S. handled it, I think we made a big mistake. And that is something that does need to be revisited.
Yeah, and just another point about the kind of disturbing nature of some of the vaccine allocation things. The Operation Warp Speed was run by the military and intelligence agencies, and they used Palantir technology to decide the allocation, who the vaccine would be allocated to primarily, which is a, you know, and they targeted critical populations with that technology, saying that critical populations need to be vaccinated first, which is kind of troubling when you know Palantir's history with oppressing Black and brown people. But do you have time for one more question, Sabby?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so initially I agreed with, when I was watching the Jimmy Dore interview with Cornel West, I agreed with his analysis on West focusing too heavily on identity politics. But that was before I watched RBN's critique of Jimmy's characterization. And my initial opinions and then change of mind after watching your guys' show did, however, give me an epiphany about West's campaign that I wanted to pitch to you and see if you agree with it. So for people who lean anti-establishment, but because of their own race or background might have racial blind spots, I think they might misinterpret West's mention of identity as neoliberal, because it's often being preceded or proceeded by West talking about how Trump is uniquely more fascist than Biden. And the argument that he gives for that is that Trump scapegoats the vulnerable, which I would argue that Biden also does. He censored the, his DOJ is going after the African Socialist Party, or I can't remember. There's this crime bill and many other things. So I want to ask you, do you think that this pairing of greater evil Trump rhetoric with emphasizing the need to protect people from certain identity groups might lead people who aren't as enlightened on racial issues as you guys as at RBN to just see West as another liberal? So in a sense, like, do you think that it's kind of a messaging error on West's part that might lead someone like Jimmy or myself to initially critique West's use of identity politics?
I think that people have to remember that social justice in reference to racial issues did not start with liberalism. We have to think back to revolutionaries that we had in this country. We have to think back to Malcolm X, MLK, the Black Panther Party. These weren't people that actually, ascribed to liberalism. Actually, when you think back about it, Malcolm X spoke out against liberals. So did Martin Luther King. And the Black Panthers considered themselves to be Marxists, like socialist Marxists, right? So I think that part of the problem is the Democratic Party has co-opted some of the revolutionary actions that have happened in this country. And that's why some people see it as that, oh, this is just a Democrat talking point, et cetera. But we have to remember that Cornel West was fighting for these issues before a lot of us were even born. I mean, longer than I've been alive. And this was before liberalism really took hold in the Black community, for example. So Dr. West has always been fighting for oppressed people. He wrote a book called Race Matters. Like, this has been his life's work. I think that some people had that fear because Dr. West was connected to the Bernie Sanders campaign. And we all know how Bernie Sanders did us, right? Like, he funneled people back into the Democratic Party after he suspended his campaigns. But I think people have to remember, when someone is running as a third party or independent candidate, they are running against the Republican and the Democrat. They are not just running against Joe Biden. They're not just running against Donald Trump. But one of the things that I pointed out is I went back to Jill Stein's campaign when she was running in 2016. She actually used the same rhetoric as Cornel West. She said that Donald Trump was a fascist, and she said that Hillary Clinton was a neoliberal, like warmonger. So she did the same thing. And I think that, again, like I told Dr. West, like I do disagree with him in reference to that issue. I told him that Joe Biden is also fascist, and I pointed out several examples that point to that. But I think that what I have noticed is that it does seem like some people are looking at the definition of fascism as a textbook definition. He's an academic, so he's looking at it that way. I had this very discussion with Glenn Loury as well. He said the same thing, that Joe Biden's not a fascist. And I explained to him, I said, well, yes, he is. When you make these laws that mandate people and say that they have to get the jab in order to keep their job, that's an element of fascism. When you create or co-write crime bills, that's an element of fascism, particularly you're targeting a specific group of people. When you and your administration target people and social media platforms and come after them because you don't like the speech that they're using and you're trying to censor them and remove their voices from online spaces, that is, an example of fascism. So what I've noticed with the academics, though, is that they seem to just look at that textbook definition of it and say, well, Trump actually tried to disrupt the law. Like he went against the law. He actually supported the January 6th insurrection. So he was going against our Constitution and the law, et cetera. But there are different ways that people can be fascist, in my opinion.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sabby, for coming on. I appreciate you talking to us.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Sabby. And if you if you wanted to like give a place where people can follow you on social media or check out your YouTube channel or your Rumble or RBN, just let us know where to find you. And if you want to tease anything that's coming soon.
Yes, you can find me on YouTube, Rumble, and Rockfin. My channel name is Sabby Sabs, same name for all platforms. And you can find me on Twitter, Sabby Sabs 2. That's the number 2. And teasing anything coming forward, I actually have Chairman Amali Yeshitela will be with me Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. ET.
Cool. We'll be checking that out, and we recommend everyone else does as well. Thank you again, Sabby.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks so much.